You know, I remember a day when Demon Hunter was not only made to be cool, but also be playable even if you were completely stoned off your tits. Then Blizzard changed that, and now something is not right with Havoc Demon Hunter. It's the Illidan spec. Easily WoW's most iconic. It screams Warcraft. It's from the biggest expansion, but you rarely see them in-game. At least it feels like that anyway, but we had to be sure for this video, so we grabbed data from Warcraft logs and from Raider.io. And it turns out Havoc Demon Hunter really is a dying spec. Just take a look at these charts. So the first ones here are raid participation, specifically the percentage of DPS parses that are Havoc Demon Hunter. And outside of a spike during a Mirdrasil, where Havoc was actually considered a top tier in its throughput, they have fallen, and they've fallen off a goddamn cliff, just, you know, without hover or any Demon Hunter bullshit. They've went from just over 10% through most of BFA to around half of that. I mean, in Narubar, they are 9th out of 13 classes, and in Aberrus, they were 11th. But before Dragonflight, they were reliably in the top 5, so this has went from the top to the bottom. Rating obviously isn't everything, and our data is far from perfect, so to get some more, we went over to get Mythic Plus data from Raider.io, and over there, it actually turns out it's even worse. There is a spike whenever they were considered OP, but otherwise, it is a huge fall off. This season was actually their worst of all time at a paltry 3.7%. That is tiny. Over Dragonflight and the War Within, Havoc literally went from one of the top specs to now being one of the least played in World of Warcraft. And that's not just from the data, players are also feeling it. Just browsing about, this title caught my eye. Pain of playing a forgotten WoW spec. Yeah, Blizzard have forgotten one of their most iconic specs ever. That is fair to say, and in this case to the point where a diehard fan is calling it pain. Thankfully, Patch 11.1 wants to fix that, and these changes may bring Havoc back. So let's examine them. Now, there's a thing I've been doing in my personal free time that you don't know. I've actually been building like little apps and tools, and that's why today's sponsor is really relevant. They're Boot Dev. And with Boot, you'll learn back-end web development using Python and Go, which are two awesome languages that will set you up well as a programmer. And why I love Boot is actually how it works specifically. It's the vibes, the sauce, because it is a fantasy RPG where you've got quests, XP, public leaderboards, all that fun stuff. I mean, just look at the leaderboard updating in real time as users are completing lessons, and so much more, like, say, the spellbook feature, which is awesome. As you go through course content, you unlock more of the spellbook, which has got loads of programming reference materials in it, but all done as you learn. It's so cool. Basically, Boot's founder loves role-playing games. Big WoW gamer, by the way, viewer of the channel, and that's why it's built for people like us. And of course, you're learning real practical skills here, not just programming basics. That will mean you doing portfolio projects, mastering Git, doing lots of server client stuff, and all that you'll actually need for the real job. And the best news is you get 25% off your first purchase at boot.dev/Bellular, and it's zero risk because you can browse all their content, do their demos, and so much more for free. And when you do buy, it's with a 30-day money-back guarantee. The largest change Blizzard have made is stopping this from happening, and in case you missed it, I'll just play it again. So here's what you need to know about that. Since Dragonflight's talent tree came in, Demon Hunters were forced to either take momentum or inertia, and both of these talents tied them to having to use Fell Rush all of the time. Now, this really did not combo well with other things. The gameplay was basically about locking everything in to get all of their buffs set up when using Fell Rush to open these tiny little windows of damage, and when that window's open, sweating like crazy to squeeze in the most optimal next few GCDs that they could. And then just doing that again and again and again. Fell Rush essentially dominated. If you did not embrace it, your damage would suck. And let's be real, Fell Rush is changing the positioning of your character. Sometimes you want to pay attention to the raid, the fight. You don't want to be zipping all over the place. Patch 11.1 fixes some of that, which is the good news. And while it seems small, the change to inertia that they've made is humongous because inertia now activates with Fellblade, right? And to call this a fix is honestly an understatement. This is a liberation of the Demon Hunter for so many people. Playing it will actually now be far more safe as well, because Fellblade takes you straight to your target. It'll take you right into melee range. That means you don't have risk of pulling mobs you didn't want to pull, fell rushing into fire, or, of course, more frustratingly, not having fell rush up when you really needed it most, or just any of those fiddly, clunky movement-based things. So that's one change. The other one then is momentum. Momentum has been reworked into exergy. And yes, exergy is a word. It's from physics, and well, I guess trying to get the Demon Hunters to learn physics is a tall order, but that's what they've done. What's cool, though, is how exergy works, because now it only requires you to press Vengeful Retreat, something that you do anyway. And if you put that together, that means Vengeful Retreat, Fellblade in. But as I'll get to later, Blizzard have actually made that even better. But there is a second part to this, Unbound Chaos, which is the trigger for Inertia's damage window. Right now, it comes from pressing Immolation Aura, but in patch 11.1, it also comes from Vengeful Retreat. This is honestly huge. The upshot is that this whole column of talents works by pressing Vengeful Retreat and then pressing Fellblade. Now you can still Fell Rush in if you want to, if you're used to it or you want a bit more AoE damage, but Fellblade will be there as a safe option for positioning your character and one that is more reliable. And here's the real nice thing that they've done, right? If you hit Fellblade immediately after Vengeful Retreat, it actually cancels the Vengeful Retreat backflip early. So you know that clunky thing with the Demon Hunter where, on paper, the fantasy of a Vengeful Retreat back and then a rush in felt cool. You could see a character doing that in storyboards and think, oh, that would be awesome. But in World of Warcraft, it would always feel just a bit clunky. Well, here, by working in an animation cancel, it is so much more playable, and the good news is, it'll also keep you in melee range way more. That's amazing! And look, these have been a long time coming. It sucks that it's taken this long, but these are good. And more good news is, there are other changes to tackle as well, so let's get into those. Any Means Necessary was a talent, and what it would do is it would basically make Mastery a stat that was better for you. It's actually now gone, and various numbers have been tweaked across the spec to even out your stat priority, so that's quite good. And in its place, we have got a talent that will trigger a Throw Glaive whenever you use your Blade Dance, which of course will increase the value that you get from all of the different Throw Glaive boosting talents. And to be honest, I think the idea that whenever you do one spell, you trigger another spell, that's cool. It's more interactive and it will work with everything else that other spell, the one that is triggered, sort of functions on with your talents. And what this may even do as well is make the Aldrachi Reaver hero talent tree actually worth taking, which is pretty nice. Next, we've got something that will be fairly fun if you like I-Beam. Cycle of Hatred has been redesigned. Now I-Beam stacks 5 seconds of cooldown reduction on I-Beam, and that will actually stack up to 20 stacks. And the upshot of this is that your I-Beam will be brought down to a 20-second cooldown flat. You'll just be I-Beaming all the time, and this buff actually persists out of combat for a minute. So once you get going, you get in the flow, you'll just have 20-second cooldown I-Beams for the rest of the fight or the next few fights, which is really cool. And those I-Beams will of course fit into more of your damage windows because they're more frequent. Okay, that's the body of the changes, and thus far, man, it does seem real good. But there is the big question, all those numbers I talked about at the start. Will this save a dying spec? Dying might seem hyperbolic, but I think the numbers point to just that. First things first, what's our appraisal of Blizzard's design work here? I would say basically, very, very good indeed. Well done. They should be happy with themselves. Those Fell Rush problems are kind of gone and fixed. And this will make current Demon Hunters happy. That's good news. But as our charts show, there's not that many current Demon Hunters. So the real question is, how do you get more Demon Hunters whenever so many people have just abandoned the spec? And will this do that? I actually do not think that it will, because looking at our raid data, it showed 2 things that do bring players back to a spec. The first is that being meta, like say DK and Shaman having around a 50% increase from the last tier to this one, kind of shows. Yeah, flavor of the month is real. People actually do change. Now, anyone could have told you that, and the same actually goes for the second reason, and that is being a mix of easy, or at the very least easy relative to throughput, and having a cool fantasy. Basically, whatever Paladin is right now. Because, well, look at how Paladins are played. There is a little bit of a drop-off in Nerubar, despite my personal best efforts rerolling to 1, but the spike after the major patch 10.1 rework is absolutely insane for Paladin. People did come back. Even after that drop, it still accounts for 11.4% of all DPS, which is massive compared to almost every class. And this new trend started with the rework that Paladin received. Before that, it was merely trading blows with the rest of the pack. So people love Paladin. Will this make people love Havoc? So maybe it's just that melee DPS players just yearn for the Crusades. Maybe it's that. But I honestly think it's because the new Ret Paladin is simple, it's easy to understand, it's fun, and it's effective. If you ask Paladins, you'll get lots of answers, but I think a lot of them will also just say, it is simple, and I get to focus on the game mechanics and enjoy what the designers have built. And in an era where, dungeons have got plenty of complexity and raids do as well, and where, I suppose as an older gamer, I'm more interested in what cool new designs they've cooked up in bosses, it just fits for me. And that is what the Demon Hunter always was supposed to be from the very beginning, where it was meant to be approachable. It certainly doesn't hurt that in an extremely lethal Season 1, well, instead of shitting yourself and dying, you could just press the bubble button, which is pretty good for Paladins. So, back to Havoc. A lot of people who loved Havoc were drawn to it in Legion because it was easy and it was rule of cool. That's why I played one for a bit then. But then Blizzard lost sight of that as the talent trees developed. It got way more sweaty, way more complex, and it's a similar enough story to what players have found with healer design over time. And what it is the classic Blizzard class design cycle. So, specs become more complicated. Difficulty should correlate with output, but that would break balance, so complex specs end up only being played by unique and infrequent individuals. Which is to say, people who love the challenge for the sake of the challenge, don't care about the meta, or just love that spec through thick and thin. Now, to respond to a problem like that, Blizzard then adds options, like the one we talked about here, Exergy, that is way easier to play and streamlines things. But then that ends up being rarely taken. They're more simple, so they have to perform worse than the harder talent, and per the simulations, they do. And it's often the sims that will define the meta, and the meta is played by copy and pasting from guides. So you end up in a situation where a spec is too complex for the output that it does have easier options, but those aren't seen to be performant, the meta is defined by performance, therefore people just gravitate away from the spec. It happened to Demon Hunter, and especially because utility creep has left behind Chaos Brand and Darkness as just being fine utility, which is obviously not good for their Mythic Plus pick rates, which have cratered. And honestly, when it gets to new hero talents in Midnight, Blizzard, I mean, Aldrachi Reaver, who's that? What's that? I know it's artifact weapon lore, but come on. I think they should just go for the direct, shameless Illidan route. He's popular for a reason. Anyway, with Havoc, they don't have to just copy Paladin, right? It is good to have options that feel different, and it's okay to have a niche class. That's totally fine, like say the Windwalker, but in this case, it's an iconic spec for an iconic class that has been bleeding out badly for a long time, and I think the fix is obvious. Drop the madness from Havoc's buff stacking. Give it a little bit of the Ret treatment. Classes are played in content, so stacking like UI heavy buff tracking just feels like the old way of doing things, and that is what hasn't really been fixed up here. Now, to be clear, patch 11.1's changes are a great start. It is a much more forgiving, much more refined spec, and major pain points have been smoothed out. This is absolutely a win, and if you already like the idea of Demon Hunter, or you used to like it in the past, but you just didn't like the momentum and Fel Rush, like defined gameplay, oh hell, it is time to go and play it, right? You'll enjoy it. But it's not a we're so back situation like what I've experienced with my old main, the Marksmanship Hunter in 11.1. And with Illidan almost certainly returning for the last Titan, this is one that is worth getting right. But of course, the good news is that the other type of hunter did get quite the rework. There's going to be a huge influx of Marksmanship Hunters in patch 11.1. It is awesome, and you can find out why in the next video.